What is up, everybody? We're on day 67 of our Bible in a Year series in Joshua 10 today. We'll be progressing on through there, and it's good stuff. We're going to get into some interesting stuff today. So let's jump straight in, and it'll be on the screen. You can follow along. If you have a Christian Standard Bible, CSB Bible, that is what we are reading out of this time around. So, chapter 10. Now, King Adoni-Zedek of Jerusalem heard that Joshua had captured Ai and completely destroyed it, treating Ai and its king as he had Jericho and its king, and that the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were living among them. Remember, Gibeon are the ones that tricked Israel into having peace with them. So Adoni-Zedek and his people were greatly alarmed because Gibeon was a large city, like one of the royal cities. It was larger than Ai, and all its men were warriors. Therefore, King Adoni-Zedek of Jerusalem sent word to King Hoham of Hebron, King Piram of Jarmuth, King Japhia of Lachish, and King Dibir of Eglon, that's a strange name, saying, "Come up and help me. We will attack Gibeon because they have made peace with Joshua and the Israelites." So the 5 Amorite kings, the kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jarmuth, Lachish, and Eglon, joined forces, advanced with all their armies, besieged Gibeon, and fought against it. Then the men of Gibeon sent word to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal, "Don't give up your servants. Come quickly and save us. Help us. For all the Amorite kings living in the hill country have joined forces against us." So Joshua and all his troops, including all his best soldiers, came from Gilgal. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for I have handed them over to you. Not one of them will be able to stand against you." So Joshua caught them by surprise after marching all night from Gilgal. I think it's kind of interesting that if you remember back to Gibeon and that story and how everything kind of went with them, they weren't supposed to make peace with them. The Israelites were not supposed to make peace with the Gibeonites. However, the Gibeonites tricked Israel, got the peace, and even though they weren't supposed to make peace with them, God is still handing over these other armies to Joshua and the Israelites. So, I don't know, just found it kind of interesting that God is still, even when Israel misstepped. Now, they were tricked, but it does specifically say that they made the treaty, or they made the peace without first consulting the Lord. And so there is an implication there that they still did something wrong, even though the Gibeonites had tricked them. And even with that, God is still coming in favor of Israel. So it's interesting. Verse 10. The Lord knew them and threw them into confusion before Israel. He defeated them in a great slaughter at Gibeon, chased them through the ascent of Beth Horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel, the Lord threw large hailstones on them from the sky along the descent of Beth Horon all the way to Azekah. As they died, more of them died from the hail than the Israelites killed with the sword. So this is something too. It's not just necessarily that God is giving them favor in battles and stuff, right? Like, Yes, God's giving them favor in battles, but he also just throws hail down on them. Yeah, I mean, he's God. He can do what he wants. Verse 12. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to the Israelites, Joshua spoke to the Lord in the presence of Israel. Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon over the valley of Aijalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on its enemies. Isn't this written in the book of Jashar? So the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed its setting almost a full day. There have been no day there has been no day like it before or since, when the Lord listened to a man, because the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp at Gilgal. Now the 5 defeated kings had fled and hidden in the cave at Makkedah. It was reported to Joshua, the 5 kings have been found. They are hiding in the cave at Makkedah. Joshua said, roll large stones against the mouth of the cave and station men by it to guard the kings. But as for the rest of you, don't stay there. Pursue your enemies and attack from behind. Don't let them enter the cities, for the Lord your God has handed them over to you. So Joshua and the Israelites finished inflicting a terrible slaughter on them until they were destroyed. Although a few survivors ran away to the fortified cities, the people returned safely to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah, and no one dared to threaten the Israelites. Then Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave, and bring those 5 kings to me out of there. That is what they did. They brought the 5 kings of Jerusalem, Hebron, Jeremoth, Lachish, and Eglon, to Joshua out of the cave. When they had brought the kings to him, Joshua summoned all the men of Israel and said to the military commanders who had accompanied him, come here and put your feet on the necks of these kings. So the commanders came forward to put their feet on their necks. Joshua said to them, do not be afraid or discouraged. Be strong and courageous, for the Lord will do this to all the enemies you fight. After this, Joshua struck down and executed them. He hung their bodies on 5 trees, and they were there until evening. At sunset, Joshua commanded that they be taken down from the trees and thrown into the cave where they had hidden. Then large stones were placed against the mouth of the cave, and the stones are still there today. On that day, Joshua captured Makkedah and struck it down with the sword, including its king. He completely destroyed it and everyone in it, leaving no survivors. So he treated the king of Makkedah as he had the king of Jericho. Joshua and all Israel with him crossed from Makkedah to Libnah and fought against Libnah. The Lord also handed it and its king over to Israel. He struck it down, putting everyone in it to the sword, and left no survivors in it. He treated Libnah's king as he had the king of Jericho. From Libnah, Joshua and all Israel with him crossed to Lachish. They laid siege to it and attacked it. The Lord handed Lachish over to Israel, and Joshua captured it on the 2nd day. He struck it down, putting everyone in it to the sword, just as he had done to Libnah. At that time, King Horam of Gezer went to help Lachish, but Joshua struck him down along with his people, leaving no survivors. So I've heard before. I don't personally think this is a very strong argument because I think it's dismissed very, very easily. I've heard before people say that this is showing a contradiction, right? The kings had already been struck down, but now they're saying the kings are in the cities fighting. I think very, very simply, word is traveling around of what's going on. I'm sure that the people of these cities either knew with a good deal of confidence, or they could assume that their kings had died. So there would be a new king appointed. Then Joshua crossed from Lachish to Eglon, and all Israel with him. They laid siege to it and attacked it. On that day they captured it and struck it down, putting everyone in it to the sword. He completely destroyed it that day, just as he had done to Lachish. Next, Joshua and all Israel with him went up from Eglon to Hebron and attacked it. They captured it and struck down its king. He left no survivors, just as he had done at Eglon. He completely destroyed Hebron and everyone in it. Finally, Joshua turned toward Debir and attacked it, and all Israel was with him. He captured it, its king, and all its villages. They struck them down with the sword and completely destroyed everyone in it, leaving no survivors. He treated Debir and its king as he had treated Hebron and as he had treated Libnah and its king. So Joshua conquered the whole region, the hill country, the Negev, the Judean foothills, and the slopes. With all their kings, leaving no survivors, he completely destroyed every living being, as the Lord, the God of Israel, had commanded. Joshua conquered everyone from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza and all the land of Goshen, as far as Gibeon. Joshua captured all these kings and their land in one campaign because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned with all Israel to the camp at Gilgal. Okay, chapter 11. When King Jabin of Hazor heard this news, he sent a message to King Jobab of Madon. So I live in the south, and Jobab sounds like a very, very southern name. The kings of Shimron and Aksaph, the kings of the north in the hill country, the Arabah south of Chinnereth, the Judean foothills, and the slopes of Dor to the west, the Canaanites in the east and west, the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites at the foot of Hermon in the land of Mizpah. They went out with all their armies, a multitude as numerous as the sand on the seashore, along with a vast number of horses and chariots. All these kings joined forces. They came and camped together at the waters of Merom to attack Israel. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them, for at this time tomorrow I will cause all of them to be killed before Israel. You are to hamstring their horses and burn their chariots." So Joshua and all his troops surprised them at the waters of Merom and attacked them. The Lord handed them over to Israel, and they struck them down, pursuing them as far as Greater Sidon and Misrephoth, Maim, and to the east as far as the valley of Mizpeh. They struck them down, leaving no survivors. Joshua treated them as the Lord had told him. He hamstrung their horses and burned their chariots. At this time Joshua turned back, captured Hazor, and struck down its king with the sword, because Hazor had formerly been the leader of all these kingdoms. They struck down everyone in it with the sword, completely destroying them. He left no one alive. Then he burned Hazor. Joshua captured all these kings and their cities and struck them down with the sword. He completely destroyed them, as Moses, the Lord's servant, had commanded. However, Israel did not burn any of the cities and stood on their mounds except for Hazor, which Joshua burned. The Israelites plundered all the spoils and cattle of these cities for themselves, but they struck down every person with the sword until they had annihilated them, leaving no one alive, just as the Lord had commanded his servant Moses. Moses commanded Joshua that is what Joshua did, leaving nothing undone of all that the Lord had commanded Moses. So Joshua took all this land, the hill country, all the Negev, and the land of Goshen, the foothills, the Arabah, and the hill country of Israel with its foothills, from Mark Halak, which ascends to Seir, as far as Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon at the foot of Mount Hermon. He captured all their kings and struck them down, putting them to death. Joshua waged war with all these kings for a long time. No city made peace with the Israelites except the Hivites who inhabited Gibeon. All of them were taken in battle, for it was the Lord's intention to harden their hearts, so that they would engage Israel in battle, be completely destroyed without mercy, and be annihilated, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. At that time, Joshua proceeded to exterminate the Anakim from the hill country, Hebron, Debir, Anab, all the hill country of Judea and of Israel. Joshua completely destroyed them with their cities. No Anakim were left in the land of the Israelites, except for some remaining in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. So Joshua took the entire land in keeping with all that the Lord had told Moses. Joshua then gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments. After this, the land had rest from war. Chapter 12. The Israelites struck down the following kings of the land and took possession of their land beyond the Jordan to the east of the river, from Arnon River to Mount Hermon, including all the Arabah eastward. King Sihon of the Amorites lived in Heshbon. He ruled from Aror on the rim of the Arnon River, along the middle of the valley, and half of Gilead up to the Jabbok River, the border of the Ammonites. The Arabah east of the Sea of Chinnereth to the Sea of Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, eastward through Beth Jeshimoth and southward, below the slopes of Pisgah. King Og of Bashan, of the remnant of the Rephaim, lived in Ashtaroth and Edrei. He ruled over Mount Hermon, Salecah, all Bashan up to the Gesherite and Maccathite border, and half of Gilead to the border of King Sihon and Heshbon. Moses, the Lord's servant, and the Israelites struck them down. And Moses, the Lord's servant, gave their land as an inheritance to the Reubenites, Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh. Joshua and the Israelites struck down the following kings of the land beyond the Jordan, from the west, from Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon to Mount Halak, which ascends toward Seir. Joshua gave their land as an inheritance to the tribes of Israel according to their allotments. The hill country, the Judean foothills, the Arabah, the slopes, the wilderness, and the Negev, the lands of the Hethites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. The king of Jericho won the king of Ai, which is next to Bethel, won the king of Jerusalem, won the king of Hebron, won the king of Jarmuth, won the king of Lachish, won the king of Eglon, won the king of Gezer, won the king of Debir, won the king of Geder, won the king of Hormah, won the king of Arad, won the king of Libnah, won the king of Adullam, won the king of Makkedah, won the king of Bethel, won the king of Tappuah, won the king of Hepher, won the king of Aphek, won the king of Lasharon, won the king of Madon, won the king of Hazor, won the king of Shimron, Miran, won the king of Akshaph, won the king of Tanakh, won the king of Megiddo, won the king of Kadesh, won the king of Jokneam in Carmel, won the king of Dor in Naphath Dor, won the king of Goim in Gilgal, won the king of Tirzah, won. The total number of all kings, 31. Okay, that is it for the reading for today. Interesting stuff. So we're seeing, which this will, it won't be the last time, but we see a lot of battles, right? Recaps of battles and things like that, which Joshua, yes, was the leader of the Israelites, but he was leading the Israelite army. So I think that is to be expected. Okay. Question 1. The miracle of the sun standing still in Joshua 10 is breathtaking. What does this event tell us about God's willingness to intervene for his people? Well, this is seen as a very large thing, which I'm not saying it's not. It is. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, like the God that created everything, yeah, he'll be able to make the sun stand still. So I mean, it's still a miraculous thing. It's still an amazing thing for us. But we shouldn't be surprised when we see God able to do this stuff, also willing to do this stuff for our benefit, especially if we are working to do what He wants us to do, honoring His commands, on following the rules that He has set for us. If we're doing things like that, we shouldn't be surprised when we see God do miraculous things in order to help us do what He has called us to do. Yeah. Question 2. Joshua's relentless campaign in chapters 11 and 12 shows both victory and persistence. How can we apply that kind of endurance to challenges in our own lives? I sound like a broken record, but I really think part of this comes back to gratitude and having a good perception on what God has already brought us through. It makes it easier to face things that we're currently in. It makes it easier to hold on and have that endurance when things are difficult, things are not pleasant, things are not ideal situations. It makes it easier to go through that and suffer through that if necessary, knowing that God has brought us out of everything before, and we trust that He's going to bring us out of this one as well. So that endurance, that persistence really comes from, I think, a place of understanding who God is, understanding His character, and gratitude. Question 3. Amid the conquest, God repeatedly assures Joshua of success. What role does trusting God's promises play when we face overwhelming odds? This might be similar to like what I said previously. I think I don't remember what day it was, but God reassuring Joshua because Joshua is maybe uncertain. Like these seem like very, very insurmountable odds, and it's not a. This is me trying to make sense of why this continuously comes up. This is not something that's said explicitly in the text, so this is my interpretation. I don't think Joshua was like backing down from doing what God had told him to do. I think if that was the case, then we would have seen that. I think it's more of a maybe he's nervous, maybe he's unsure. He's confident that God has told him to do this, so he's going to do it, but he's not sure if he's going to make it. He's not sure if they're going to be successful. He's going to follow God regardless of the outcome. And I think that is maybe why we see some of this reassurance come through. Again, this comes back to trust, right? Trusting that God is going to do for us in the future because He's already done for us in the past. Now, this doesn't always look exactly the same. It's not always something that is a pleasant situation to go through. I'm not even saying like God's always going to give you something because He's giving you something in the past. No, God's going to allow you through something because He's brought you through something before in the past. God's going to pull you through this really terrible situation. He's going to get you to the other side of it because He's brought you through other ones before. I know that kind of thinking a lot of times can be taken up by prosperity type preachers and butchered. But yeah, that is it for today. That is all our questions, all our reading. Appreciate everyone watching through up to this point. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, all of that stuff. I enjoy reading comments, getting messages from people as much as I can. I do try to respond to comments and messages and the like. Tomorrow, we'll be back in Joshua. Joshua 13 is where we're going to be picking up again tomorrow. more fun stuff, more interesting stuff, more great Bible reading. So I encourage you to come back tomorrow. If you're watching these lives, come back tomorrow. Come back for the next video and follow along with where we're at, what we're saying, and it'll be good. Thanks. God bless.